More often than not, when we look at a car or segment of cars, we tend to focus on the top trim levels, the most powerful and best equipped, and most desirable the model has to offer. But these are rarely the versions that are getting the sales, and base models are more likely to be the bread and butter sales versions. So in this video, we are going to look at the progression of the lovely stripper, starting specifically with the large car segment of the American market. Prior to the mid-1950s, entry-level tended to refer to brands, specifically Ford, Chevy, and Plymouth, and more recently Studebaker. But the market was reaching a point that even these brands were expected to have better equipped models, with available V8s and automatic transmissions. Although a straight 6 with a 3-speed manual, usually with a column shift or 3 on the tree, was standard fare, with base models costing less than most small imports, and even higher priced brands also offering entry-level models. Probably the cheapest car for sale in the US at the time was the Renault 4CV, starting around $1,200. A car that was 144 inches long and weighed 1,400 pounds, powered by a 750cc inline-4 with around 18 horsepower. The cheapest American car was the Metropolitan, sold by Nash and Hudson dealers, although it was made by Austin. Starting at $1,500, it was 150 inches long and an 85-inch wheelbase and 1,800 pounds, powered by a 1.2-liter inline-4 with 42 horsepower, unable to quite reach 60 miles an hour, and taking more than 27 seconds to do the quarter mile. The best-selling import was the Volkswagen Type 1, or Beetle, 160 inches long and a 95-inch wheelbase, and 1,600 pounds, using an 1,100cc flat 4 with 29 horsepower. A 70-mile-an-hour car that took nearly 28 seconds to do the quarter mile. It started around $1,600, or about the same as a base Ford or Chevy, or a Nash Rambler. The Rambler was 185 inches long and a 100-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,700 pounds, using a 3.2-liter, 196 cubic inch straight 6 with 90 horsepower in base form. It topped out at just over 85 miles an hour and took 20.5 seconds to do the quarter mile. While in the American full-size market, prices started at $1,593 for a Chevrolet 150 utility sedan, which was 196 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase and 3,100 pounds. It came with a 3.9-liter 235 overhead valve straight 6 with 123 horsepower, easily identifiable by its lack of stainless steel side trim. And although a V8 and automatic were optional, so was the rear seat. It was a car with a top speed of 90 and a quarter-mile time of about 19.5 seconds. The slightly better equipped Model 210 was the year's bestseller. The mainline business coupe was the starting point at Ford at $1,606 and was 199 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase and 3,100 pounds. Base engine was a 3.7-liter 223 straight 6 with 120 gross horsepower. It took just over 20 seconds to do the quarter mile, and top speed was just shy of 90. Costing $1,738 was the Plymouth Plaza two-door sedan, 204 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase and about 3,100 pounds, starting with a 3.8-liter 230 providing 117 horsepower. Top speed was just over 85, and the quarter mile took a little more than 20 seconds. The Studebaker Champion was in the same price bracket at $1,741, with the two-door sedan being the entry point, which was 199 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase and 2,700 pounds, with a 3-liter 186 straight 6 making 101 horsepower. It could top 90 miles an hour and do the quarter mile in the low 20s. The Dodge Coronet started at $2,013 for a two-door sedan, being 212 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase and 3,200 pounds. Using an 123 horsepower version of the 230 straight 6, it could nearly reach 85 miles an hour and took less than 20.5 seconds to do the quarter mile. Pontiac's Chieftain was $2,105 for a two-door sedan, was 203 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,500 pounds. Power came from an 173 horsepower 287 V8 for speeds over 100 miles an hour and a 19-second quarter mile. The Nash Statesman cost $2,215 for a base four-door sedan, 202 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase and 3,100 pounds, powered by a 100 horsepower 196 straight 6 for a quarter mile under 21.5 seconds and a top speed over 75. The base Mercury 4-door only warranted a custom designation and was $2,218, 206 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,400 pounds. It had an 188 horsepower 292 V8 for speeds over 100 miles an hour and a quarter mile under 18 seconds. Buick had the 40 Special 2-door sedan for only $2,233. 207 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,700 pounds. Its 143 horsepower 264 V8 moved the car to a high 17-second quarter mile and speeds over 105 miles an hour. The DeSoto Firedome 4-door was priced at $2,498 and was 218 inches long on a 126-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,900 pounds. The 291 V8 produced 185 horsepower for speeds over 100 miles an hour and a quarter mile in the low 19s. Packard's Clipper was only $2,586 and 215 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,700 pounds. Power came from a 320 cubic inch V8 with 225 horsepower, taking just over 17 seconds to do the quarter mile and exceeding 105. The Chrysler Windsor cost $2,660 for a base 4-door that was 219 inches long on a 126-inch wheelbase and 3,900 pounds. Its 301 V8 produced 188 horsepower for speeds near 105 miles an hour and a quarter mile under 19 seconds. The Lincoln Custom was $3,563, 216 inches long on a 123-inch wheelbase, and weighed 4,200 pounds, using the same 341 V8 with 225 horsepower as other Lincoln models, making it a high 17-second car with a top speed over 110. The price of entry at Cadillac was $3,882 for a Series 62 hardtop, a car that was 223 inches long on a 129-inch wheelbase and nearly 4,400 pounds. It got 250 horsepower from its 331 V8, moving it to 110 miles an hour and a mid-18-second quarter mile. By 1960, there was an influx of new, cheaper compact models, but we will look at them in a later video. And base models of large cars were often more popular, only costing a couple of $100 more, and the best seller of the year was the Chevrolet Impala, and would continue to be through the mid-70s. The entry-level big Chevy was the Biscayne at $2,175, being 211 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase and 3,600 pounds, with a 3.9-liter 235 with 135 horsepower. It could almost do 95 miles an hour and did the quarter mile in 20 seconds. Ford had the Custom 300 for $2,230, up to 214 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,700 pounds. Base engine was a 3.7-liter 223 straight-six for 145 gross horsepower. Top speed was 95, and the quarter mile took just under 20.5 seconds. The Plymouth Savoy was $2,260 at 209 inches long on a 118-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,300 pounds. Its 3.7-liter 225 slant-six was good for 145 horsepower. Top speed was just over 95, and it took just over 19.5 seconds to do the quarter mile. The Dart Seneca name was being used as the base standard Dodge model, essentially the same car as the Plymouth, costing $11 more to start. The growing mid-sized market of the mid-60s further diluted the need for stripped-down big cars, but they remained popular with base versions of their own. The Ford Custom started at $2,361 for a car that was 210 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase and weighed 3,300 pounds. The 240 Big Six produced 150 horsepower, moving it to 100 miles an hour in a low 19-second quarter mile. Chevrolet's Biscayne was $2,363, 213 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase, and weighing 3,300 pounds. Its Turbo Thrift 230 straight-six made 140 horsepower for speeds over 95 miles an hour and a mid-19-second quarter mile. The Plymouth Fury 1 was $2,376, 209 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,500 pounds. Power came from a 225 for 145 horsepower and a 19.5-second quarter mile and a top speed of 95. Pontiac's Catalina started at $2,734, was 215 inches long on a 121-inch wheelbase and 3,700 pounds. Base engine was a 389 V8 with 256 horsepower for a mid-15-second quarter mile and speeds over 120 miles an hour. The Mercury Monterey began at $2,767, being 218 inches long on a 123-inch wheelbase and weighing 3,800 pounds. With a 250 horsepower 390 to start with, it could do the quarter mile in 17 seconds and reach near 120 miles an hour. The base Dodge Polara was $2,806, 212 inches long on a 121-inch wheelbase, and 3,800 pounds. The 318 V8 produced 230 horsepower and moved the car through the quarter mile in under 17 seconds and to 115 miles an hour. The LeSabre was the entry-level big Buick at $2,948. It was 217 inches long on a 123-inch wheelbase and weighed more than 3,700 pounds. The 300 cubic inch V8 provided 210 horsepower for a high 17-second quarter mile and speeds near 110 miles an hour. The cheapest Oldsmobile 88 for the year was the Jetstar, priced at $2,995. Also 217 inches long on a 123-inch wheelbase and 3,700 pounds. It had a bigger 330 V8 with 250 horsepower. Top speed was over 115, and the quarter mile was in the high 16s. Chrysler's Newport went as low as $3,009. It was 218 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase and weighed 4,000 pounds. The two-barrel 383 was good for 270 horsepower, a mid-16-second quarter mile, and speeds over 115 miles an hour. Cadillac offered the lowly Calais for $5,059, 224 inches long on a 130-inch wheelbase, and more than 4,400 pounds. Like all Cadillacs, it used a 429 V8 with 340 horsepower for a mid-16-second quarter mile and speeds over 120 miles an hour. Lincoln offered only the Continental at the time. For 1970, the Chevrolet Biscayne was $2,787, 216 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase, and 3,600 pounds. It used a 250 straight six with 155 horsepower, putting it in the high 19s with a top speed of near 100 miles an hour. The big Plymouth Fury 1 was $2,790, 215 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase, and 3,600 pounds. Still using a 225 slant six with 145 horsepower, and able to exceed 100 miles an hour and do the quarter mile in the high 18s. The Ford Custom started at $2,850 for a four-door that was 214 inches long on a 121-inch wheelbase and 3,500 pounds. It actually used a smaller six than the base midsize car, a 240 cubic inch straight six with 150 horsepower, for a quarter mile in the mid-19s and a top speed near 100 miles an hour. The Dodge Polara started at $2,960, was 220 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, and weighed 3,800 pounds. The 145 horsepower 225 slant six made for a top speed that was around 100 miles an hour, and the quarter mile was roughly 19 seconds. AMC's Ambassador started at $3,020. It used a 232 straight six, but with 155 horsepower, 15 more than in their smaller cars. It was 208 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,300 pounds, making a car that could top 105 and do the quarter mile in the low 19s. The big Mercuries were still more upmarket of Ford, with the base Monterey starting at $3,248. It was 222 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,100 pounds, partly due to its base 390 V8 with 265 horsepower, for a quarter mile under 17 seconds and a top speed over 120. The Pontiac Catalina had moved somewhat down market, with a $3,249 starting price for the coupe, 218 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,000 pounds, and using a base 350, 255 horsepower V8, taking just over 17 seconds to do the quarter mile and exceeding 120. By the mid-70s, the six-cylinder versions of the big cars were gone, thanks to increases in weight and perceived losses in power. The Ford Custom 500 and Mercury Marquis base sedans started at $4,477 and $5,049, respectively. The Ford was 224 inches long on a 121-inch wheelbase and 4,400 pounds, while the Mercury was 229 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase and 4,500 pounds. Base engine in the Ford was a 351 with around 225 gross horsepower, or 148 net, for a quarter mile under 20 seconds, and a top speed over 105. Well, the Mercury got a 400 V8, or more accurately a 402, rated at 144 net horsepower, taking just over 20 seconds to do the quarter mile and not quite reaching 105. The Plymouth Grand Fury and Dodge Monaco sedans started at $4,565 and $4,605. They were 222 or 223 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,300 pounds. Base engine was a 318 V8 with 150 horsepower net, or 225 gross, for a sub-20-second quarter mile and speeds near 110 miles an hour, while the Chrysler Newport was $4,854, 227 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase, and 4,400 pounds. It started with a 360 V8 with 180 net horsepower, or 260 gross, for a top speed of 110 and a 19-second quarter mile. Chevrolet's Bel Air cost $4,345, was 223 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, and weighed 4,200 pounds. Base engine was a 350 V8 with 145 horsepower net, or 225 gross, for a high 19-second quarter mile and speeds near 105 miles an hour. Pontiac once again ignored the small V8 trend with the Catalina, which started at $4,612 for a base four-door. It was 226 inches long and a 124-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,300 pounds, and was powered by a 400 cubic inch V8 with 170 net horsepower, or 250 gross, for an 115-mile-an-hour top speed and a low 19-second quarter mile. Buick's LeSabre four-door was $4,771, was 227 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase, and 4,400 pounds, powered by a 350 producing 160 net horsepower, or 230 gross, for a low 19-second quarter mile and speeds near 110. Oldsmobile's Delta 88 was similar, with a coupe costing $4,830, also 227 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase, and 4,300 pounds. Its 350 made 170 horsepower net, or 250 gross, moving the car to a 19.5-second quarter mile and speeds near 110, while the Cadillac Calais Coupe started at $8,184, was a whopping 231 inches long on a 130-inch wheelbase, and 5,000 pounds. The massive 500 cubic inch V8 made 190 horsepower net, or roughly 315 gross, for speeds over 115 miles an hour and a quarter mile under 19 seconds. By 1980, downsizing and inflation meant you were getting less for more, and there was a clear shift towards the mid-size segment. Chevrolet's Impala Sport Coupe was $6,535 to start, 212 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase, and weighed 3,300 pounds. It used a 229 V6 with 115 horsepower, and had a top speed near 100 and did the quarter mile in the mid-20s. The cheapest big Mopar was the Grand Fury, having returns starting at $6,741, being 220 inches long on a 119-inch wheelbase, and 3,400 pounds. It used a 90 net horsepower 225 slant 6, giving it a top speed near 95 and a low 22-second quarter mile. While the base LTD cost $6,875, was 209 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase, and 3,400 pounds. Engine was a 302 V8 with 130 horsepower, for a 20-second quarter mile and a top speed near 105. The mid-80s would be going into the second round of downsizing, but the bigger dated cars were cheaper than their new front-wheel drive counterparts. And in the big car segment, GM was a bit inconsistent, with the Chevy Impala being little changed. Prices started at $9,519. It was still 212 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase, and weight was 3,500 pounds. Power came from a 5-liter 305 V8 for 165 horsepower, giving it a top speed over 110 and a quarter mile under 18 seconds. The Oldsmobile Delta 88 Royale and Buick LeSabre were essentially the same car and started at $10,488 and $10,455. They were 218 inches long on the same 116-inch wheelbase and 3,500 pounds in coupe form. But base engine was the 3.8-liter or 231 Buick V6 with 110 horsepower, making for a top speed around 100 miles an hour and a quarter mile in the low to mid-20s. Cadillac's DeVille of 1985 was one of the early downsized front-wheel drive cars and started at $17,900. It was 195 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,300 pounds, and used a 249 cubic inch 4100 high-technology V8 for 125 horsepower, pushing it to 105 miles an hour, and through a quarter mile in the mid-19s. The Pontiac Bonneville started at $9,549 and was essentially an upgraded version of the previous mid-size Le Mans, meaning it was 200 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase and 3,300 pounds, also using the 110 horsepower 3.8-liter Buick V6 for a 20-second quarter mile and speeds over 100 miles an hour. Dodge did something similar with the Diplomat, simply changing segments, while the Plymouth Grand Fury and Chrysler Fifth Avenue became the same car. Prices started at $9,399 for the lesser models and $13,978 for the better-equipped Chrysler. They were 206 inches long on a 113-inch wheelbase and 3,600 pounds. Power came from a 5.2-liter 318 V8 with 140 horsepower for a high 18-second quarter mile and speeds near 110 miles an hour. The Ford stuck to the more traditional big cars with the Crown Victoria, Mercury Grand Marquis, and Lincoln Town Car. The Ford and Mercury were $11,627 or $12,240, and 211 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,600 pounds. The 5-liter 302 produced 140 horsepower for a mid-18-second quarter mile and a top speed near 105. The Lincoln used the same engine, but was 219 inches long on a 117-inch wheelbase, weighed 4,000 pounds, and cost $19,047. Cars that would be little changed by decade's end, outside of minor facelifts, although the changes, including added features, had weight of the Ford up about 200 pounds, and electronic fuel injection had horsepower of the 5-liter V8 up to 150, and the base price had climbed to $17,257. Things were similar at Chevrolet, with the Impala name having been dropped, leaving the $14,525 Caprice as the base version, seeming like a comparative value, while the 5-liter was up 5 horsepower to 170. Most other large GM cars had been downsized, such as the $15,744 Pontiac Bonneville LE, 199 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase, and just over 3,300 pounds, using a 3.8-liter 231 V6 for 165 horsepower, for a high 17-second quarter mile, and speeds over 120 miles an hour. And Dodge was offering the Dynasty for as little as $12,295. One of the last and largest of the K-car-derived cars, 192 inches long on a 104-inch wheelbase, and 3,000 pounds, using a 3-liter V6 for 141 horsepower, a high 17-second quarter mile, and a top speed over 115. But by the mid-90s, Chrysler was having a revival with the LH sedans. They were 202 to 203 inches long on a 113-inch wheelbase, and weighed 3,400 pounds. Base engine was a 3.3-liter V6 with 161 horsepower for a low 17-second quarter mile and speeds near 125 miles an hour. Offered as the Dodge Intrepid starting at $17,974, the Eagle Vision ESI starting at $19,697, and the Chrysler Concorde starting at $20,550. GM's front-wheel drive offerings in the segment included the $20,804 Pontiac Bonneville SE, the $20,410 Oldsmobile 88 Royale, and the $21,735 Buick LeSabre Custom. They were 200 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase and around 3,400 pounds. All used the 3.8-liter Buick V6, but the base Buick used an 170 horsepower version, while the Pontiac and Oldsmobile started at 205 horsepower, making them half a second quicker, doing a high 16-second quarter mile, and nearly 10 miles an hour faster, hitting 140. Cadillac's base DeVille started at $34,900, was 210 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase, and 3,800 pounds. It used a 4.9-liter or 299 cubic inch V8 with 200 horsepower, moving it to a quarter mile just over 17 seconds, and speeds over 130. Chevrolet, however, stuck to the traditional rear-wheel drive big car, with the Caprice Classic starting at $20,310. At 214 inches long and 116-inch wheelbase, it weighed 4,400 pounds, and base engine was a 4.3-liter 265 V8 with 200 horsepower, for nearly 135 miles an hour and a 17-second quarter mile. All Fords were still of traditional design, even if they didn't quite have the look. They included the $20,160 Ford Crown Victoria, the $21,270 Mercury Grand Marquis, and the $36,400 Lincoln Town Car. The Ford and Mercury were 212 inches long and 114-inch wheelbase, and weighed 3,800 pounds, using an 190 horsepower 281, or 4.6-liter V8, for 130 miles an hour and a low 17-second quarter mile. While the Lincoln was 219 inches long and 117-inch wheelbase and 4,000 pounds, with the same engine providing 210 horsepower for a sub-17-second quarter mile and a top speed near 130. And little had changed at Ford with the new decade, with the Crown Victoria being up to $22,610. It was still 212 inches long and 115-inch wheelbase and 3,900 pounds, with the 4.6-liter V8 at 200 horsepower for speeds near 130 and a quarter mile under 17 seconds. The Dodge Intrepid ES now cost $20,950, was 204 inches long on a 113-inch wheelbase, and weighed 3,500 pounds. Engine was a 2.7-liter V6 with 200 horsepower for a mid-16-second quarter mile and a top speed around 135. While there was a new front-wheel drive Chevrolet Impala for only $19,265. It was 200 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase and 3,400 pounds. The 3.4-liter V6 produced 180 horsepower for a quarter mile just over 17 seconds and a top speed near 135. It would be little changed mid-decade, other than the starting price climbing to $22,780. Essentially the same car as the Pontiac Grand Prix, which started at $23,460, was 198 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,500 pounds. It, however, used the 3.8-liter N200 horsepower tune for a low 16-second quarter mile and a top speed over 140, while the regular Cadillac DeVille cost $46,395, was 207 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,000 pounds. It used a 275 horsepower 4.6-liter V8, making it a low 15-second car capable of around 150 miles an hour. Chrysler returned to rear-wheel drive with the $22,495 Dodge Magnum SE and $23,920 Chrysler 300. They were 197 to 198 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,800 to 3,900 pounds. Base engine was an 190 horsepower 2.7-liter V6 for a quarter mile just over 17 seconds and a top speed near 135, while Fords continued to carry on with little changes, with the Crown Victoria starting at $24,430 and the Grand Marquis $24,585. But horsepower was up to 224 for a quarter mile under 17 seconds and an 135 mile an hour top speed. The Lincoln Town Car Signature Series was up to $41,675 with 239 horsepower from the same engine. And although they would continue past the end of the decade unchanged, the new cheaper Taurus filled in as the new big car. The base SE was $25,995, 203 inches long using a 113-inch wheelbase, and weighed 4,100 pounds. It had a 3.5-liter V6 with 265 horsepower for a mid-15-second quarter mile and a top speed of about 145. The Chevrolet Impala LS was the cheapest big car of the year, starting at $24,715. It was still 200 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase and weighed 3,600 pounds, now with a 207 horsepower 3.5-liter V6, making it a mid-16-second car with a top speed over 135. At Dodge, the Magnum wagon was replaced by the Charger sedan, with an SE costing $25,140, 200 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase, and 3,800 pounds. The 2.7-liter was down to 178 horsepower, and top speed was down about 5 miles an hour. But power would soon be up. The 2015 Charger SE started at $26,495, while the base Chrysler 300 was up to $30,545. They were 198 to 199 inches long, still on a 120-inch wheelbase, and weighed 4,000 to 4,100 pounds, using a 292 horsepower 3.6 liter, taking just over 15 seconds to do the quarter mile and exceeding 155 miles an hour. The GM cars were using a 112-inch wheelbase, with the $22,780 Impala being 201 inches long, 3,900 pounds, using an 196 horsepower 2.5 liter 4 for a low 16-second quarter mile and speeds near 140. While the Buick LaCrosse started at $33,635, was 197 inches long and 3,800 pounds, with an 182 horsepower 2.4 liter for 135 mile an hour top speed and a quarter mile in the high 16s. And the base Cadillac XTS came in at $44,600, was 202 inches long and 4,100 pounds, with a 3.6 liter V6 with 304 horsepower, putting it in the high 14s and near 155 miles an hour. Styling of the Ford Taurus was little changed, but base engine was now a 240 horsepower 2-liter turbo, starting at $26,790. It did more than 145 miles an hour and a mid-15-second quarter mile. The Lincoln MKS used the same 113-inch wheelbase, but was 206 inches long, 4,300 pounds, and started at $42,810, using a 304 horsepower 3.7 liter V6 for 150 miles an hour and a quarter mile just over 15 seconds. But the Taurus was gone before 2020 with no replacement, leaving the base Continental as the cheapest big car they offered. At $46,305, it was 201 inches long on a 118-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,500 pounds, powered by a turbocharged 2.7 liter with 335 horsepower, for a mid-14-second car capable of more than 165 miles an hour, compared to the big Cadillac CT6 costing $58,995 and being 204 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,000 pounds. Its 3.6 liter V6 also produced 335 horsepower, and with standard all-wheel drive, it was a sub-14-second car, also able to exceed 165 miles an hour, while the Chevrolet Impala was unchanged, with the LT starting at $31,620, and soon all three of these would be gone without replacement, leaving the little changed Dodge Charger starting at $29,470 for the base SXT. At this point, it remains the only true full-size American car on the market, aside from the $79,990 Tesla Model S, also only offered as an electric for 2025. It is 207 inches long on a 121-inch wheelbase, weighing 5,800 pounds, with the initial MSRP for a base RT being $59,595. A car that is supposed to be capable of a quarter mile in the mid-12s and have a top speed of 135 miles an hour. But cheaper, lighter gasoline versions are on sale as we speak, starting at $51,995. Although perhaps what they really need to be successful is an affordable stripper model. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.